Well, joining me live now is a former White House Chief of Staff and Senior Fellow at the US Studies Centre at the University of Sydney, Mick Mulvaney. He joins us live from South Carolina. Mick, thanks so much for your time, as always. Roe v. Wade has changed things in America. What has happened where you are?
Very similar to what you've just described. I live probably 100 miles from that town that you've just mentioned. I live right on the border between the two states. And you're seeing this great sort of adjustment there. Yes, there's some violence. There's no question about it. On the pro-choice side, there has been violence like you've just documented. There's actually a story just out this evening about a possible arson. They're investigating an arson against a Catholic church in West Virginia. So there have been some domestic terrorist activities here, but not much. I think it does get a little bit blown out of proportion. A lot of folks are wondering, okay, what comes next? How are we going to deal with the fact that abortion is now not legal in half of the country? So even though the decision was leaked out several weeks in advance, there's still sort of this shock to the system that things are very different now than they were just last week.
Yeah, so essentially abortion is no longer a constitutional right. It goes to the states. And the states really, some of them have moved very quickly to put in place their own policies, if you like. This is all political, leads up to the midterms. What does this say about, again, the divide in America?
The country is certainly divided on this issue, as with so many others. Keep in mind, yes, many states are sort of now going to review their status on abortion, but more than a dozen states actually had laws on the books already in anticipation of Roe possibly being overturned. In fact, in an ironic sort of twist, there's actually some very liberal progressive states that still had laws on the books from the 1970s prohibiting abortion, and they're going to have to go back on now and pass a law to allow abortion. I happen to I see all of that as a good thing, because so many of us who were opposed to Roe versus Wade on religious and moral grounds also objected to it on constitutional grounds. We thought these decisions should have been made by elected officials in the state legislatures and not by an unelected Supreme Court, which is what they did during Roe. So these are the things that we'd like to see happen in this country. We'd like to have elected officials make law instead of judges.
It's really interesting, this debate, because it's done by the states in Australia as well. And, you know, in the last 20 years, some states have decriminalised abortion in Australia. I find it interesting that we're still talking about decisions about abortion being made by elected officials rather than, you know, an individual or a doctor. How does that sit with you?
Well, keep in mind, we're a very civil liberties-based society, right? We have the Constitution is the fundamental underpinning. And when the opening lines talk about life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness, which is actually in the Declaration of Independence, but it's reflected in the Constitution, it raises the question of when do those rights attach? Is it at birth? Is it at quickening, the time the fetus can move in the womb, or is it at conception? And what Roe versus Wade essentially did was said, well, it's at viability, which I think at the time was 24 weeks. The question that I ask people is the court the right avenue for making that decision, or should elected officials be able to do it? If you don't like the decision that the court makes about a very, very controversial moral issue, you can't change them. The judges in this country, at least federal judges, have lifetime appointments. If your legislature does something you don't like, you can change them. Courts are very slow to react to cultural changes. Legislatures are very quick to react to social changes. So, look, like I said, it's the biggest decision in my lifetime, and we'll be dealing with the outfall of this for many, many years to come.
Yeah, I mean, the legislature and the courts may not keep up with, I guess, social norms and what is happening in society. Do you have a view on whether this actually bans abortion or bans safe abortion?
Well, no, it doesn't. It doesn't do anything on abortion other than say you don't have the federal right to have one. That was the law as it existed in this country before Roe in 1973, and it is now the law again. That's what Roe did. Roe actually overturned a Texas law from the 1970s that limited the right to abortion, and the federal courts came in and said, "Look, we know the Constitution doesn't speak to abortion, but we think there's a right to an abortion buried in there." The words they used was the penumbra, the shadows of the civil liberties that are granted in our Constitution.
Yeah.
That's how they arrived at the decision. And that's what's caused a lot of difficulty for 50 years.